What if I told you the most important geopolitical shift of the 21st century is not happening in Washington, Paris, Beijing, or Moscow, but in a strip of countries across Africa that many world leaders once ignored? A region the West once considered under control has now shattered every prediction. In less than 3 years, this region has flipped the global chessboard, removed decades of foreign military presence, rewritten economic partnerships, and told the world's most powerful governments, Africa will no longer be controlled. This is the rise of what analysts now call Africa's Coup Belt, a political and strategic transformation no one saw coming. A chain of countries once tied tightly to France and the West is cutting those ties one by one and replacing them with new alliances, new security blocs, and new economic strategies. For France, this isn't just a diplomatic setback. For the West, it isn't just a policy failure. For the first time in modern history, African nations are collectively rejecting the old model of foreign influence and building something entirely new. International think tanks call it the most rapid decline of French geopolitical influence since World War II. Defense analysts call it a turning point for Africa's military sovereignty. Economists call it a continental power shift with global consequences. But for millions of Africans, it's not just strategy. It's a long-delayed demand. Respect, self-determination, control. This new power shift didn't happen quietly. Across West and Central Africa, government after government reversed decades of foreign military arrangements, expelled troops, terminated mining contracts, shut down bases, rejected aid conditions, and openly accused Western powers of manipulating internal politics. And for the first time, multiple African nations responded not individually, but together. They signed new military cooperation agreements. They formed new regional security alliances. They replaced foreign troops with African-led protection forces. They turned to new global partners on their own terms, not by pressure. And while Western governments warn of instability, African citizens are saying something very different. We're taking back control of our resources, our security, and our political future. That's why this story is bigger than coups, bigger than governments, bigger than borders. This is the story of a continent that refuses to be dictated to, and the global powers now scrambling to understand what comes next. Because when Africa moves with unity, when Africa moves with purpose, when Africa moves with a new vision for sovereignty, the entire world has to pay attention. This documentary reveals how Africa's Coup Belt expanded, why France is losing strategic ground, what new alliances are emerging, and how this shift will reshape global politics for the next century. Welcome to the rise of Africa's new geopolitical era, a story the world cannot ignore. For more than a century, the balance of power in Africa, especially in the Sahel, was shaped not by African governments, but by foreign powers. France maintained troops, military bases, mining rights, political ties, and deep control over economic systems across West and Central Africa. Western nations believed this arrangement was secure, permanent, unbreakable. But in just a few short years, that belief collapsed. One by one, nations across the Sahel, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Guinea, and others, shifted away from Western influence, removed old military arrangements, and formed a new political identity. Analysts call it the Coup Belt. But what's happening here is about far more than military transitions. This is the largest geopolitical realignment in Africa in 60 years, and France stands at the center of the fallout. This documentary explores how Africa's Coup Belt emerged, why France's influence is collapsing, and how the new alliances forming today will redefine global power for decades. To understand Africa's Coup Belt, we must go back to one place: Mali, 2020. For decades, Mali housed thousands of French troops under Operation Serval and later Operation Barkhane, missions said to stabilize the region and fight armed groups. But after years of conflict, many Malians believed nothing had improved, and that foreign forces had become part of the problem, not the solution. When Mali's government changed in 2020 and again in 2021, everything shifted. Mali's new leadership demanded that France respect the country's sovereignty. When disagreements grew, French troops were told to leave. For the first time since the 1960s, France was forced out of a country it once considered a reliable ally. This moment, Mali's break from France, was the spark. Other nations watched closely. Citizens across the region saw that a government could reject foreign control and survive politically. Nationalist movements grew. New alliances formed. And then, one by one, the dominoes began to fall. In 2022, Burkina Faso became the next turning point. Years of insecurity, attacks, and political frustration had intensified. Burkina Faso had long relied on France for military support, but like Mali, citizens questioned the results. A new government emerged, and its first decisions shocked Paris. French troops ordered to leave. Military agreements suspended. New alliances formed with regional African partners. But what surprised the world wasn't just Burkina Faso's shift. It was the massive public support behind it. Across the capital, young Burkinabe citizens waved flags, chanted for sovereignty, and demanded a new era of African-led security. Whether one agrees or disagrees with their politics, one fact was clear. The region was changing direction, fast. If Mali was the spark and Burkina Faso was confirmation, Niger was the earthquake. For years, Niger was described as France's last stronghold in the Sahel. It hosted 1,500 French troops, drone bases, and major uranium supply routes that powered French electricity grids. When its government changed in 2023, France expected the existing arrangement to continue. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Niger's new leadership immediately demanded, French troops must leave. This was not symbolic. It was strategic, economic, and geopolitical. If France lost Niger, it would lose key uranium supplies, major military bases, think tank influence, US-aligned security networks, regional political leverage. Paris attempted diplomacy, pressure, public statements, negotiations. None of it worked. Niger doubled down. And within months, French forces withdrew, ending nearly 50 years of uninterrupted military presence. This was more than a withdrawal. It was a humiliation for a Western power that once dominated the region. But Niger didn't act alone. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, three countries facing similar challenges, made a historic decision. They formed a new regional alliance called the Alliance of Sahel States, also known as the AES. This wasn't just a political gesture. It was a direct replacement for Western-backed frameworks. AES countries agreed to share intelligence, coordinate defense, build joint military forces, align economic policies, adopt new foreign partnerships, reduce dependence on Western nations. For France, this was a strategic disaster. For Africa, it was a new experiment in regional autonomy. AES immediately declared that outside interference would no longer dictate the region's future. And perhaps most importantly, they said African security must be led by Africans. This message resonated across the continent, from the Sahel to Central Africa, from West Africa to the Horn. Whether people agreed or disagreed politically, one truth became impossible to ignore. A new African power bloc was emerging. When the political shifts began spreading, ECOWAS, West Africa's major economic bloc, faced pressure to respond. The organization threatened sanctions, blockades, and even military intervention in Niger. But instead of folding, the AES alliance pushed back. Public opinion across the region swung against ECOWAS' position, and the organization eventually softened its stance. By early 2024 and 2025, the political reality was clear. ECOWAS no longer had the influence it once did. AES was now a powerful alternative. This raised a fundamental question. If regional blocs can challenge Western-aligned institutions, if foreign troops can be expelled, if economic arrangements can be rewritten, what else could the African continent change? France's losses in the region are not just symbolic. They are material and strategic. French troops removed from Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Central African Republic. For the first time in decades, France's direct military presence in the Sahel collapsed. France relied on African countries for uranium, oil, gas, gold, infrastructure contracts, trade influence. Most of these relationships are now shifting toward Africa-first policies or toward new global partners. France once influenced political outcomes across the region, partly through training programs, diplomats, military missions, development funding. But public sentiment in many Sahelian nations turned sharply against France, making political influence increasingly impossible. Perhaps the biggest, least discussed collapse. Public trust in France evaporated. Across cities and rural towns, polls showed major public rejection of French involvement. Whether justified or not, perception became reality. And in geopolitics, perception is power. As France and some Western nations lost ground, African countries explored new global relationships, but on their own terms. These included regional African security alliances, partnerships with countries like Turkey, cooperation with China on infrastructure, new trade talks with Russia, technology exchanges with the Gulf, local military and economic reforms. The narrative shifted from who will help Africa to who will Africa choose and under what conditions. This is the first time in modern history that African nations are actively shaping global partnerships, not merely accepting them. The geopolitical wave did not stop at Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Other nations, through elections, political transitions, or public pressure, also reconsidered their dependence on France. Some expelled ambassadors. Some reviewed mining contracts. Some reduced military cooperation. Some demanded new terms for aid and loans. This wasn't a coup phenomenon anymore. It became a continental movement for political autonomy and economic self-determination. The Coup Belt became a symbol, not of instability, but of resistance to foreign dominance. And that symbolism spread farther and faster than anyone expected. Africa stands at a crossroads, a new era of sovereignty. Countries are demanding respect, not dependency. Partnerships, not domination. Rise of regional defense alliances, AES, and possibly future blocs, could lead to African-led security systems. Economic reorientation, more focus on local resource control, fair contracts, domestic industries, regional supply chains, reducing reliance on external forces, global competition. The West, China, Russia, Turkey, and the Gulf all want influence, but Africa is negotiating on a stronger footing. Youth-driven movements. With over 60% of Africa's population under 25, public opinion matters more than ever, and young Africans overwhelmingly support sovereignty and reform. For the United States and Europe, this shift creates challenges and opportunities. Challenges: loss of influence, loss of economic partnerships, reduced military presence, a narrative of declining Western power. Opportunities: if Western nations adapt, offering fairer agreements, respecting African sovereignty, partnering on climate, technology, and education, relationships can be rebuilt. But if they continue relying on old models of influence, Africa will move on without them. The real story of Africa's Coup Belt is not instability. It is a battle for dignity, representation, and self-direction. For the first time since independence, African nations are acting collectively to shape their own geopolitical destiny. France did not expect this. The West did not expect this. Even many African governments did not expect this. But a new era has begun. An era where Africa is no longer the background of global politics, but the center. The Coup Belt is not the end of something. It is the beginning. A beginning of African-led security, African-directed development, African-shaped diplomacy. What happens next in Africa will change the world. And the rest of the world will have no choice but to adjust.